Let me ask you something uncomfortable right from the start. Have you ever felt like you're behind in life, even though you did everything you were told to do? You studied, you adapted, you stayed connected, you kept learning new skills, just to stay relevant. And yet, somewhere deep inside, there's this quiet pressure whispering, you should be further by now. That feeling isn't random, and it isn't weakness, it's psychology. Millennials grew up at a very strange intersection in human history. We were raised on promises of stability, but matured inside constant uncertainty. We were told effort equals outcome, but watched effort as stop guaranteeing anything. We were taught to dream big, while slowly realizing that the rules changed mid-game. And that created a tension most people don't talk about. On the surface, millennials look adaptable, tech-savvy, emotionally aware, open-minded. But beneath that flexibility sits something heavier. A generation quietly exhausted from thinking too much, comparing too often, and carrying invisible expectations that never seem to turn off. Here's the part that matters. The millennial mind didn't just grow up with the internet, it grew up being observed by it. Every achievement is visible, every delay feels public, every mistake feels permanent. Psychologically, this changes how the brain processes identity. Previous generations measured progress internally, against neighbors, family, or time. Millennials measure progress globally, against highlight reels, against timelines curated by algorithms designed to show extremes, not reality. So when you feel behind, it's not because you are, it's because your reference points are distorted. There's a concept in psychology called relative deprivation. It's the idea that dissatisfaction isn't caused by lack, but by comparison. Millennials live inside the most comparison-dense environment humanity has ever created. Success isn't rare anymore, it's constantly visible. And visibility tricks the brain into believing success is common, immediate, and expected. That belief quietly rewires motivation into pressure, which leads to another pattern many millennials share: chronic self-interrogation. Am I choosing the right path? Is this enough? Should I be doing more? What if I waste my potential? These questions don't come from laziness or lack of ambition. They come from overexposure to possibility. When everything feels possible, nothing feels stable. The brain struggles to commit when it knows there are infinite alternatives. This is why so many millennials feel mentally tired even when life looks calm on the outside. They're not running from danger, they're running simulations, constantly. What if I switch careers? What if I don't? What if I settle? What if I miss my chance? The mind becomes a loop, not because something is wrong, but because the environment trained it that way. And here's something rarely said out loud. Millennials were also the first generation, encouraged to tie identity to passion. Do what you love sounded inspiring, but psychologically, it blurred a boundary humans actually need. When work becomes identity, uncertainty at work becomes uncertainty about self. So when a job feels unstable, it doesn't just threaten income, it threatens meaning. That's why burnout among millennials often doesn't feel like exhaustion. It feels like disillusionment, a quiet realization that chasing fulfillment can become just as draining as chasing survival. And still, most millennials don't give up. They adapt again, they learn again, they reset expectations again, but each reset costs something emotionally. There's a grief many millennials carry that they don't have language for. What? Grief for a timeline they believed in. Grief for a version of adulthood that promised arrival instead of endless transition. Grief for certainty. And yet here's the paradox. This same generation that feels lost is also deeply reflective. Millennials question systems, relationships, and definitions of success in ways previous generations rarely did. That questioning isn't failure, it's cognitive evolution. Psychologically speaking, millennials are less driven by external authority and more by internal alignment. They care about meaning, fairness, emotional safety, and coherence. The problem is that society hasn't fully adapted to reward those values yet. So many millennials feel like they're preparing for a future that keeps moving. If any of this feels personal, that's because it is, but not in the way you think. It's not about individual shortcomings. It's about a nervous system shaped by rapid change, constant information, and delayed stability. And here's the most important thing to understand. Feeling uncertain does not mean you're doing life wrong. It means you're doing it consciously, in an unconscious world. But there's something else happening beneath the surface, something quieter, something most people miss. Despite the exhaustion, despite the doubt, millennials are slowly redefining what a meaningful life actually looks like. Not louder success, not faster timelines, but deeper alignment. And that shift, that internal rebellion against hollow achievement, is where everything begins to change. In the next part, we're going to explore why millennials are secretly rejecting traditional success models, how that creates emotional conflict, and what the psychology says about rebuilding purpose without burning out. Because what looks like confusion might actually be transformation in disguise. What makes this transformation so difficult is that it doesn't look like growth while you're inside it. It looks like hesitation. It looks like second-guessing. It looks like starting over too many times. But psychologically, something very specific is happening. Millennials are the first generation to collectively question the idea that productivity equals worth. That may sound simple, but it cuts against centuries of conditioning. For a long time, humans survived by output. Do more, earn more, endure more. Identity followed function. Millennials inherited that framework and then watched it crack. They saw people do everything right and still struggle. They saw loyalty fail. They saw stability dissolve. So the brain adapted. Instead of asking, "How do I succeed?" it began asking, "What is success actually for?" That question is heavy, and unanswered questions drain energy. This is why many millennials feel stuck between two worlds. One world rewards speed, certainty, and constant growth. The other values balance, meaning, and mental well-being. Wanting both creates friction. Choosing one often feels like betrayal of the other, so the mind stalls, not because it's broken, but because it's negotiating. There's another psychological layer here that rarely gets attention: delayed adulthood markers. Previous generations moved through life stages in predictable order. Work, stability, family, identity. For millennials, those markers became flexible, postponed, or fragmented. When the brain can't anchor progress to clear milestones, it turns inward for validation. And internal validation is harder to maintain when you were raised on external feedback. Likes, metrics, reviews, performance indicators. This creates a strange emotional contradiction. Millennials are highly self-aware, yet deeply unsure. They highly informed, yet uncertain about direction. That tension can feel like anxiety, but often it's actually unresolved identity formation happening later in life. And that's not a flaw. In developmental psychology, identity formation was once believed to finish in early adulthood. But modern research shows that identity is fluid, especially in rapidly changing environments. Millennials aren't late, they're adaptive. Still, adaptation comes with fatigue. Constant self-reinvention requires emotional resources. Each reinvention asks the brain to let go of a former version of self, and letting go, even of something imperfect, creates grief. This is why nostalgia hits millennials so hard, not because the past was perfect, but because it felt coherent. There was a story, a direction, a sense of next. Today's world offers infinite paths, but very little narrative. So millennials try to write their own, and that's where the quiet strength of this generation lives. Despite doubt, millennials keep searching for alignment. They prioritize emotional intelligence. They question unhealthy norms. They talk about mental health not as a weakness, but as maintenance. That shift alone changes the future more than most realize. But here's the part that often gets misunderstood. Healing does not feel productive. Slowing down can feel like falling behind. Saying no can feel like failure. Rest can feel irresponsible when the world rewards exhaustion. So many millennials delay healing because it doesn't come with applause. Yet psychology is clear on this. A regulated nervous system is the foundation of clarity, creativity, and resilience. You cannot think your way out of burnout. You have to feel your way through it. And that's what many millennials are learning, sometimes painfully, in real time. They're learning that success without emotional grounding feels empty. That achievement without self-connection doesn't satisfy. That meaning can't be rushed. This doesn't mean ambition disappears. It evolves. Instead of asking, how fast can I get there? The question becomes, is where I'm going worth who I'm becoming? That shift is subtle, but profound. It's why many millennials change careers not for money, but for sanity. Why they value flexibility over titles. Why they invest in experiences, not just assets. Why they care deeply about purpose, even when they're unsure how to define it. There's a misconception that millennials want life to be easy. They don't. They want life to be honest. They want effort to matter. They want work to align with values. They want growth that doesn't cost their well-being. Those desires aren't entitlement. They're psychological course correction. And here's something hopeful. As millennials age, research shows emotional regulation improves, self-trust strengthens. The need for external validation slowly loosens. The same overthinking mind that once caused paralysis becomes a tool for insight. What once felt like confusion begins to feel like discernment. The pressure doesn't vanish, but it changes shape. Instead of chasing every possibility, millennials begin choosing intentionally. Instead of fearing wasted potential, they redefine potential as depth, not speed. And maybe that's the quiet legacy of this generation. Not perfection, not certainty, but consciousness, a willingness to question inherited scripts, to pause before repeating patterns, to value mental and emotional health as much as achievement. So if you're a millennial and you feel tired, unsure, or out of sync, understand this. You're not broken. You're not failing, you're living through a psychological transition that history rarely makes space for. And while it may not look impressive on a timeline, it's shaping a version of adulthood that future generations may finally breathe inside. Sometimes the most meaningful progress happens quietly, inside the mind, long before the world can measure it.